Danielle Merriweather never learned how to dream small. Maybe it came from her mother's warnings, soft as lullabies, harsh as winter winds, that the world would always measure women like her in half-steps and second chances they were never meant to take. She was born in a two-bedroom duplex in South Phoenix, stucco walls that baked in the desert heat, nights so quiet she could hear her mother's tired bones shift in the next room as she tried to sleep between graveyard shifts. Danielle's father was just a name her mother never spoke, and Danielle learned early not to ask about ghosts that didn't pay rent. By the time she was 16, Danielle could stretch $1 like it was elastic. She worked the register at a corner store after school, homework tucked into the space beneath the counter, half watching the door for anyone who might think about slipping out without paying. When she turned 18, she swapped the register for the back room of a diner, scrubbing floors and scrubbing plates, trying not to smell like grease when she walked home in the dark. But even in that life, that narrow lane of small paychecks and overdue bills, she knew how to build a better story for herself, piece by piece, choice by choice. She met Jalen's father one summer night when the desert air was thick with monsoon dust and cheap promises. He was charming the way a spark is charming before it starts a wildfire, all easy jokes, wide smiles, and empty plans. By the time Danielle realized how fast charm could sour into silence, she was 3 months pregnant and staring at a bathroom mirror, the test stick clutched in her hand like an indictment. She remembered sitting on the edge of her bed, pressing her palm over her belly, whispering promises to someone who wasn't even big enough to hear her yet. "You're not going to feel what I felt. You're not going to wonder if you're enough. I swear to God, baby, you're gonna know you're everything." When Jalen was born, he came out fighting, small fists curled tight, lungs full of thunder. The nurses joked he'd be a boxer, but Danielle just held him and knew he'd be a warrior of some kind, not the kind that throws fists but the kind that stands tall when the world tries to make him bow his head. She worked 2 jobs in those days, sometimes 3 when the diner cut her hours. Nights were the hardest, heat leaking from the swamp cooler, Jalen asleep in his crib while she sat by the window counting coins in an old Folgers coffee tin. Rent, formula, diapers. The math always looked wrong, but somehow she made it stretch. When he turned 5, Jalen asked why they didn't have a big backyard like the other kids on their street. Danielle knelt down, brushed the hair from his forehead, and told him the truth, because right now, baby, the backyard's in here. She tapped his chest with her finger. "We're gonna grow it ourselves." She didn't know if he understood then, but years later, when she'd find him sitting cross-legged on their tiny patch of grass reading library books about faraway cities and strange machines, she liked to believe he did. High school came like a storm they couldn't outrun. Jalen was bright, too bright for the way the world wanted to see a boy like him. Teachers noticed when he stayed late to help clean the chem lab, but they also noticed when he walked home alone through neighborhoods that clutched their purses tighter when he passed by. Danielle heard it all, the way a counselor once suggested Jalen might be better off with a trade instead of a college plan. She smiled politely, then went home and sat him down at the kitchen table, the same wobbly one they'd used since he was a baby. "You want that diploma, you take it," she told him. "If you want the uniform, you wear it proud. But don't you ever think small because they can't see big." Jalen listened. God, did he listen. The night he told her he'd enlisted, Danielle stood in their cramped living room, carpet threadbare beneath her feet, and felt her knees go soft. She didn't beg him not to go, she knew better than to fight a man's calling when it came from a place of honor. But when he hugged her goodbye, duffel bag slung over his shoulder, she whispered the same thing into his ear she'd whispered the day he was born, "You're everything, baby. You're everything." Basic training turned into overseas tours. Danielle learned how to keep her voice steady on bad phone connections, learned how to smile when his letters arrived smelling faintly of dust and foreign air. She sent care packages stuffed with socks, instant coffee, cookies that arrived mostly crumbs by the time they crossed an ocean. She sent prayers with them too, tiny ones stitched into every word she wrote on the outside of the box. "Come home whole. Come home whole. Come home whole." The nights were hardest. She'd sit by the window again, the same spot she'd counted coins in, only now she counted days instead. Days between letters, days between calls, days between rumors on the news that never said his name but always made her stomach twist tight. Some nights she'd fall asleep on the couch, still dressed for work, TV buzzing in the background with talk shows that never had faces like hers. And when she dreamed of him walking through the front door, boots heavy on the floor, voice saying, "Mama, I'm here." When Jalen did come home, taller, broader, eyes a little older than they should have been, he didn't talk much about what he'd seen. Danielle didn't press. She just cooked his favorite meal, fried chicken and cornbread, the kitchen full of warm air and the sound of his fork scraping the plate clean. Some nights he'd sit at that same kitchen table, papers spread out, applications, forms, emails from universities. He'd tap a pencil against his knuckles like a drumbeat and sigh. Danielle would stand behind him, hands on his shoulders, grounding him like roots he didn't always know he needed. When he got the acceptance letter from Arizona State, full ride for veterans, engineering program, an advisor who believed in him, Danielle read it twice before she let herself believe it was real. That night they celebrated with a cheap bottle of sparkling cider and takeout pizza, sitting cross-legged on the floor like they used to when he was little. He called her his biggest investor. She called him her best return. Years slipped by in a tangle of semesters and part-time shifts. Jalen studied late, worked security on weekends, called her every Sunday like clockwork. Danielle, who had learned long ago how to make do with too little, found new ways to keep herself busy. Volunteering at the community center, mentoring girls who reminded her of herself at 16, still clutching paper dreams in trembling hands. And always, she saved a little every month. Graduation day, she'd tell herself as she tucked bills into an envelope under her mattress. When he crosses that stage, I'm gonna be there so early they'll have to unlock the doors for me. The morning of the ceremony came soft and gold, sun lifting itself over the desert like a blessing. Danielle woke before her alarm, stood in her bathroom brushing her hair back into a neat bun. She pulled out the dress she'd saved for special occasions, soft navy blue with tiny pearl buttons, and laid it across her bed. Beside it, the shoes she'd only worn to weddings and funerals. She slipped them on with careful fingers, as if they might break under the weight of what this day meant. In the kitchen, she packed a small bag. Water bottle, tissues, the invitation tucked into a laminated sleeve just in case. And the roses, red and white, fresh from the corner shop that still remembered her name. She cradled them close when she locked the front door behind her, her old sedan rumbling to life like it knew it was carrying precious cargo. As she pulled into the parking lot outside Arizona State's Convocation Center, Danielle felt a flutter in her chest she hadn't known since she was a girl, hope unbound, proud and trembling all at once. She parked far from the entrance, walking the last stretch under the wide, blazing sky. Every step forward felt like stepping out of the past, out of scarcity and sacrifice and whispered prayers for one boy's safe return. And when she stopped in the courtyard, roses pressed to her heart, ticket in hand, Danielle Merriweather, South Phoenix's girl who never dreamed small, closed her eyes for one breathless second and whispered to no one but herself, "You made it, baby. And I'm right here. I'm right here." Danielle checked her reflection one last time in the dark glass of the Convocation Center's tall entry doors. She caught her breath, the faint tremor in her chest, the heat rising up her neck, the stubborn sparkle of tears she refused to let spill. She dabbed her eyes with the edge of her sleeve and forced her shoulders back the way her mother used to tell her, "Head up, baby. World's already waiting to weigh you down. Don't help it." Inside the foyer, families bustled in clusters, kids in stiff shoes fidgeting, fathers adjusting ties they only wore to church or court dates, mothers clutching programs like holy scripts. Everyone spoke in the same hushed register of pride and worry, a hush that felt almost sacred. Danielle stepped carefully through the crowd, each step echoing a private promise, "You're gonna see me, Jalen. I'm right where I said I'd be." A student volunteer in a gold vest smiled at her when she reached the check-in table. His name tag read Alex in thick block letters. He was young, barely 20 maybe, freckles and a polite nervousness in the way he fumbled with his scanner. "Good morning, ma'am. Can I see your ticket?" Danielle unfolded the laminated pass, holding it out like an heirloom. The boy took it, ran his scanner over the barcode, beep, the light flickered green. "All set." Alex beamed, handing it back. "Your seat's right up front, second row, family of distinguished graduates." Distinguished. The word sat warm in Danielle's chest like a small sun. She thanked him with a voice softer than she meant it to be. It came out more like a prayer. She slipped the ticket into her purse, fingers brushing the smooth plastic sleeve again as if to make sure it was still real. Inside, the convocation hall opened up like a cathedral, tall steel beams, banners in maroon and gold, the university's crest stitched into fabric that glowed under the bright rigged lights. Rows upon rows of folding chairs faced the stage where a long table stood draped in cloth, empty now but waiting to hold the dreams of hundreds of sons and daughters whose parents had prayed over them just like she had. Danielle walked down the carpeted aisle slowly, afraid she might trip on her own anticipation. She could feel the sweat beading on her back under her dress. The bouquet of roses in her arms felt heavier now, the stems pressing damp spots into the thin plastic wrap. When she reached the roped-off section marked Honored Guests Reserved, she paused to study the sign again. As if it might change under her gaze. As if the words might suddenly flicker and tell her she didn't belong. They didn't. The sign stayed. The seat stayed. And so did she. She slid into the cushioned chair on the aisle, careful not to crush the flowers. Her knees brushed the back of the chair in front of her. A row so close to the stage that she could see the fine print on the university seal embroidered into the podium cover. For a long moment, she just sat. Breathing. Watching other families drift in behind her, mothers in bright Sunday dresses, fathers with their cameras ready, children in too tight shoes being told to hush when they squealed at the sight of balloons bobbing through the aisles. She thought about all the days that had led here, the missed phone calls from Jalen when he was on the other side of the world, the silence that grew heavy when weeks went by without word. The tiny dread that always camped at the edge of her bed at night, whispering the worst possible stories until her prayers choked it quiet. She wondered if Jalen knew how many times she'd sat right here in this same pose, flowers in her lap, eyes locked forward, waiting for him to come home. She adjusted the strap of her purse and smoothed the folds of her dress one last time. Her fingers brushed the edge of the laminated ticket in her bag, a small comfort. Her eyes lifted to the empty stage again, her mind drifting forward to the moment he'd appear. His walk. His smile. The slight dip of his chin when he spotted her exactly where he'd told her to sit. That alone would be worth every second of every struggle. Then she felt it, a shadow over her shoulder. Heavy boots, the faint squeak of a radio mic clipped to a belt. Two men standing just inside her bubble of hard-won peace. "Ma'am." The voice snapped her from her thoughts like a slap on the wrist. She looked up, blinking into the overhead lights that haloed the taller man's head like a lie. He wore a crisp security uniform, badge shiny on his chest, hair slicked so close to his scalp she wondered if he'd checked it 3 times before leaving home. Next to him stood his mirror opposite, shorter, stockier, a clipboard tucked under one thick arm like a shield. "Ma'am," the taller one repeated. No smile. No welcome. Just the hollow formality of someone who'd already decided she was a problem. Danielle's pulse quickened, but she smoothed it down behind her practiced calm. She lifted her chin, the same way she did when a bank teller double-checked her signature on a check for the 3rd time. The same way she did when a landlord asked to see 2 forms of ID even after cashing her rent for 12 years. "Yes," she said, polite, even sweet. A kindness that cost her a little piece of her throat. "This section is for special guests only," the tall one said, voice dipped in the false softness people use when they don't want to be quoted. "I'm going to have to ask you to relocate to the general seating." Danielle's eyes flicked to the sign again, "Honored Guests Reserved." Her name on the ticket. Her son's name that made the seat hers. She looked back at the guard, her lips parting just enough for her voice to slip through steady. I am a special guest. My son's graduating today. Jalen Merriweather. The shorter guard made a soft TSK, flipping through papers on his clipboard like her name might leap off the page and shame him for doubting. I'm going to need to see some identification, ma'am, the taller one pressed, shifting his weight so his boots squeaked on the carpet. Danielle's fingers found her purse, unzipped it, retrieved her ID with the same care she used for the roses. She handed it over, her pulse fluttering against her wrist. The taller guard squinted at the card, then at her, then back at the roped-off row of seats. He didn't flinch when the shorter one leaned in to study the badge around her neck, the laminated ticket Jalen had mailed himself, sealed in a stiff university envelope like a promise you could hold in your hand. This area is for the families of the graduates, the short guard said, flat as a board. We've had people slip through before. It's for security. Danielle's throat clicked. Security. That word always tasted like metal in her mouth, the polite mask for suspicion. She took a slow breath that tasted faintly of roses. I am his family, she said again, each word deliberate, measured like she was testifying under oath. He sent me this ticket. I came early so I wouldn't miss it. A mother 2 rows overturned in her seat, frowning at the scene, whispering to a husband who glanced but didn't intervene. Phones were out, pretending to check the schedule but aimed just slightly too high. The taller guard sighed, like she'd forced him into an inconvenience. Ma'am, I'm going to ask you one more time to step outside while we confirm your credentials. You can't stay in this section until we do. Danielle felt her knuckles tighten around the bouquet stems. Thorns pressed into her palm but she didn't loosen her grip. She looked at her seat, at the empty stage, at the sign that didn't stutter when these men spoke over it. I'm not moving, she said. The words were soft, but they caught in the space like a stone dropped in a pond. I am his mother. I earned this seat the same way he did. The shorter guard's mouth twitched, not a smile, more a grimace at her audacity. He leaned closer, his breath sour with cheap coffee. Ma'am, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. Danielle's lips barely moved. I'm not making anything harder. I'm sitting. Behind her, the rustle of whispers grew like wine through dry leaves. Another mother in pearls leaned into the aisle, voice sharper than Danielle's would ever be in this moment. Is there a problem here? She asked the guards, her tone more lady of the country club than mother from South Phoenix, the kind of tone that made uniformed men flinch. The taller guard straightened. This doesn't concern you, ma'am. We're just verifying this guest's placement. Pearls lifted her chin at him, not at Danielle. She didn't need to see her. She already understood. If she has a ticket, and she's seated, maybe you should verify the empty chairs instead. Danielle almost thanked her. Almost. But the moment was too fragile to risk shattering it with more words. The short guard's radio crackled at his hip. He pressed a button, mumbled something half into his shoulder. Danielle didn't bother to listen. Her eyes found the empty stage again, her roses heavy in her lap, her mother's voice at the back of her mind, head up, baby. Don't help the world weigh you down. She stayed seated. For Jalen. For herself. For the promise she'd whispered into his tiny newborn ear all those years ago. And somewhere, just out of sight, 6 men in tailored suits moved through the side corridor, boots soft on polished concrete, eyes sharp, jaws set. They knew the weight of loyalty. They'd carried it across oceans. And in a few steps more, they'd carry it straight to her side.